Welcome one and all, and today is our fifth session in a series of six webinars hosted by Governance Gurus. I'm Rob Ford, the Executive Director of Governance Gurus, and we're here today to talk about enhanced emotional intelligence for more influence. We think about how we can have more impact in our own private life, also within our career, in our job, and also how we can be socially aware. So today we'll look at some of those aspects. When we think about the brain is made up of many cells, and we hear a lot about left brain thinking, right brain thinking. My daughter, we sent her to something called Hey Guru, and Hey Guru is a Japanese intensive training of the right brain, and it's there to help with creativity, spontaneity, and also problem solving. It also looks at some aspects of the left brain, but with the right brain, the right side brain, the creativity, the brain can be developed and honed. And we found that over a number of years, especially during the first 7 years, the right side of the brain can be massively influenced and developed. And so we found that our daughter was able to very quickly pick things up. She was learning different languages. She speaks 3 languages at the moment, and she has developed that side of her brain. But we're here to talk about emotional intelligence, which is one aspect of cognitive thinking, and we think about the rationale of how we make decisions, whether it's through reasoning and rationale and logic, or is it through emotional feelings and state of mind. And so we'll talk about the various aspects as we go along the way. Please feel free to write any questions you have as we go through the session. There'll be a section at the end that will allow you to raise questions or ask questions via your microphone. But today we're here to focus on the mind, on the brain, and also what will make us better and have more influence in our life generally. How do we become better people? And during this lockdown over the last 3 months, personally, I've taken a lot of time to look inwards and consider the things that I think, say, and do, and my motivations, and also the areas where I can actually develop as an individual. And I've done the same for my team, talking to them about how they can develop their understanding. I've also been working with a number of clients in regards to coaching and mentoring, helping them get in touch with their emotional state, and also how to use that, those feelings of fear, happiness, sadness, surprise, and all of the rest of the emotions that we feel, and harness those to better have impact in their own life and also within their career. And so when we think about ourselves, we have to know our own emotions before we can start to even understand other people's emotions. And at any given time, we can be feeling a number of different emotions, and emotions flow through us, and there's different gradients, there's different levels of how we feel. So for instance, today, I ask you, how are you feeling? How are you doing today? On the surface, you may say, I'm feeling fine, I'm healthy, I feel great. But on different levels, maybe you're happy and healthy, but also there's elements within your life that are creating other emotions. Maybe you have a sick child at home, maybe one of your parents is ill. And so though you're happy in a general state of mind, there are also other emotions in play within your brain. And so we have to understand what these emotions are and how do we harness those, and how do we ensure that they do not sabotage our decision making, our responses, our reactions when we're either in our personal and private life or in our professional life. And so there's really six main emotions that we have. Happiness, of course, it's a state of mind, happiness. Surprise, it can be good surprise, wow, somebody gave me a birthday cake, or it can be surprise shock that something bad has happened. And so I tell you a story, and maybe some of you will have already heard it, but when I was in Malaysia visiting family there, they told me about that in Malaysia sometimes things happen, and sometimes in certain areas there's things called where people raid your home and try and get money from people within the house. And it was late in the evening, and all of the lights went off. I was in the kitchen, and all of the lights went off, and I heard a lot of noise out in the lounge. And I was in a fight or flight state, and more of a fight state, ready to take on aggressors. And then suddenly I saw some light, and then the family were there, and then they started singing happy birthday to me. And so it was one of those circumstances where I was surprised. Initially, the emotion, and there was a fight and flight aspect, and then surprise from the happiness that people had remembered it was my birthday. I had completely forgotten, and there was a birthday cake, and everyone started singing. Also, people sometimes get angry. And when we think about anger, it manifests itself in different ways. Some people will swear, use bad language. Others will huff around and bang around. Sometimes people use aggression or violence. And we have to be aware of ourselves as individuals, but also how other people react in these states. Also, sadness. Maybe somebody's had a bereavement. At this time, a lot of people are feeling very sad because of the loss of life, or because people are within their family or friends are ill. But there's also sadness because a lot of colleagues who have been not just colleagues but who have become friends have lost some of their friends because of redundancies and downsizing within their organization. And so we have to be aware of these different aspects. And fearfulness, there's sometimes anxiety or fear about the unknown. And it's not wrong to ponder what the future holds, but at the same time, we can't allow this to cripple us, because fear is a binder. Fear makes us close up, and if we have a lot of fear and anxiety happening within our brain and our emotions, this can stifle our creativity, this can stifle our rational thinking, and we focus very much on that particular emotion. So when we're making decisions, those decisions may be focused from a position of fear or of sadness or of anger or of surprise or of joy and happiness. And sometimes we have the emotion of disgust. Maybe we're not happy with somebody's table etiquette or etiquette within a meeting. Maybe they're not self-aware of their social presence and the types of things that they do. I worked in one organization, and one of the senior executives within that organization was very unaware of their behavior, and a number of people had commented and suggested that somebody should speak to that particular individual, because one of the things that they used to do is they would drink Diet Coke. Even if it was an early morning meeting, they would have 2 or 3 Diet Cokes, and they would drink one, and then they would drink a second one, and then without any warning, they would belch. They wouldn't say excuse me or pardon me, and this was a senior executive. That same individual, I came to learn that even during interview process, they would operate in the same manner. So we have to sometimes be socially aware of our behavior and how it impacts other people, and how people perceive us based on our emotional behavior, but also our social interaction and behavior too. And so we think about Daniel Goleman. Back in 1995, Daniel Goleman wrote a book called Emotional Intelligence. He wasn't the first to talk about emotional intelligence, but I've taken one of his quotes. Emotional intelligence is your ability to recognize and understand emotions in yourself and others, and your ability to use this awareness to manage your behavior and relationships. When we think about life in general, but also in our professional life, we have to really consider our behavior and our relationships, and how we foster those relationships and nurture those relationships really will be the be all and end all in regards to our overall success as a manager, as a leader, as an employee. And many of the failures that happen are where people are lacking in emotional understanding and emotional awareness, and we'll talk about that a little later on. And so when we think about the human brain and ourselves, do we know ourselves? Are we honest with ourselves? When was the last time that you sat down or lay down and in a quiet space considered how you are as an individual? What are your good traits? What are your bad traits? What is your personality? And how do you exhibit your emotions? When was the last time you thought about your behavior and the impact it might have on the people that you lead? And so it's very important that we are honest with ourselves. When we think about emotional intelligence, it's also talking to ourselves, looking inside and considering the motivations and drivers of what makes us do what we do, when we do, and how we do. And so we have to consider those things. Also, within emotional intelligence, there's 4 main categories that come to mind. And so we think about the 4 main areas, and half of those areas are to do with ourselves, and half of those areas are to do with the social aspect. And so you have to be aware of ourselves. How do you feel today? How do I feel today? Why do I feel the way I feel today? Am I anxious? Am I fearful? Am I nervous? Am I happy? And so most of the time we understand how we feel, but sometimes these feelings, we're not entirely sure where they've come from or why they're there. Have you ever been around somebody who sucks all of the oxygen out of the room, that makes you feel depressed and makes you feel as if a dark cloud is in the room. I've worked with a number of individuals, and one in particular who was very proud that he could change the mood in the room. And I'm not talking positively, I'm talking in a negative way. He could make people feel very depressed, and then move them from their happy state into a very sad state. And for very strange reasons, who knows, we were never able to work out why he felt the need to behave that way. And I even felt myself being impacted by his emotions that were being brought into the office. But I then checked myself and I said, just because he is exhibiting and talking in a very negative way and behaving in a very negative way, is this something that should impact me? And the answer to that was no. His interactions and behavior shouldn't change the way that I feel as an individual. Now, all too often, we allow people to influence us through their behavior. And because this one did that, then suddenly we justified why we should be angry, or why we should be sad, or why we should be feeling hurt, or personally feel that we're personally attacked. But we have to be aware of ourselves before we can even think about being aware of others. And so we have to manage. And this is where the whole aspect is, once we're aware of our emotions and the way that we think, then we use that information and knowledge and the memory to allow us that when we feel the onset of something, either too much happiness or too much sadness, too much anxiety, or maybe we're having too much apathy, we have to consider, why do we feel this way? What is bringing on these aspects within our brain? And so we have to manage those. And so rather than react, we have to respond to those emotions and bring them in to check. Yes, there's a time for everything under the sun, a time for living, a time for dying. So there will be births, there will be deaths that we experience as we go through life. People that we know will be passing into the afterlife, and we will find that new family members and people will come into our lives as they're born into this world. But being able to manage our emotions is very important when it comes to leadership and having impact. We also need to be socially aware. I talked about that individual that would drink the Diet Pepsi. They were not socially aware. That same individual would sometimes get up in the middle of a meeting and stretch out their back on the wall, making strange noises, and it would unsettle people within the meeting. They suffered from bad back, but it wasn't the fact that they had a bad back, it was the fact that they got up and started doing stretching without explaining to anyone, especially people that were new to the organization and didn't know the particular individual. They would sometimes act in a way almost like shock and awe to try and disrupt people's thinking. And so we have to think about our emotional state and our response and reaction to those, how we manage our relationships. And if we think about the work environment, we work within teams, we lead divisions, we might lead a whole organization, but within the organization there are mini groups and departments that also have leaders and or heads of those sections, and we have to consider how we keep those individual relationships going and blossoming, getting the best from those individuals and understanding where those people are. I've been very blessed in my life in the fact that I've worked with a number of exceptional leaders, people that are very emotionally intelligent, who are able to pick up not just on words and body language, but they are very intuitive. And so a lot of to do with emotional intelligence is to do with us being able to read not just listen, but be able to read people and individuals. And as leaders, it's very important when someone tells you that they're happy or sad or angry or there's an issue, it may not be the main driver or main issue. And so we have to sometimes ask questions. Why are you telling me this? What is it that you're going through right now? And so back in 1990, Peter Salovey and John Mayer introduced the concept of emotional intelligence. And so if we think about it, emotional intelligence and the understanding of how the brain works has only really been there for around 30 years, which is a very short amount of time. Various studies have shown that the more people are aware and able to control their emotions, this will determine how people will interact with them. If you can imagine that somebody is highly volatile and will get angry very quickly, this is not somebody that you would necessarily want to be around during times of high stress and pressure, or where they are not meeting their particular target or objective. Also, there was a study carried out across Latin America, Germany, and Japan, and it showed that people that had higher emotional intelligence were more likely to be successful than those that had more experience in a particular industry or that had higher IQ. And so it showed that even though the cultures were different within Latin America, Germany, and Japan, that the results were almost identical. And then the Center for Creative Leadership found that the primary causes for derailing executives involved deficits in emotional competence. And this is what I was talking about a little earlier. And there's three main areas that really are things that can derail executives. And that's the ability to be able to handle change, not being able to work well in a team. Sometimes executives are withdrawn and they don't act as part of the team. If you're going to lead, you need to be part of a team. Yes, there needs to be respect. There sometimes needs to be a certain level of hierarchy depending on your organization. If you're an agile organization, then the structure will be quite flat, but still there needs to be an interaction. And then poor interpersonal relations. I worked within a law firm in the City of London, and there I was told a story about a partner and how that partner used to interact with the trainee. So it was part of the process that every partner would have a trainee that would sit in their office, and that particular individual would become very mad, would throw things across the room, throw papers on the floor, act in a very rude manner. That's not the only example. I've personally seen individuals who have poor interpersonal relations with others, or they're not socially aware. Here in the Middle East and in Dubai in particular, during Ramadan, people have to, if they want to eat, they have to eat in a closed area, and organizations encourage people not to bring smelly foods into the office. and also to be aware of colleagues that are fasting during that particular holy month. And so one particular individual in one of the organizations where I worked, they, during Ramadan, they would decide that they would eat KFC, and they would order it and get it delivered to the office. And this is a poor interpersonal relations. They weren't aware, socially aware of them, or they didn't care in regards to others that were fasting during that particular month. And so it's a shame when people actively or do something because they feel they must, or they're not aware of how their behavior is having an impact on others. And so when we think about the brain, there's obviously various parts of the brain, but we get a lot of messages. We get thousands and thousands and thousands of messages. We hear words, we see things, and we touch and feel, and we smell. All of these things are present in our brain. We are then stimulated. So the stimulus is coming through the base of the brain into the brain. And so there's various aspects within, and I'm not here to talk about the whole brain as a whole, but I'm trying to just give us an overview and picture of some of the way that the brain works. And so the front neocortex is there for logic and rationale, for cognitive aspects, for thinking, analyzing, remembering, and various other aspects for the questioning side of things. And then we have the top area of the brain, which is more of the executive or management system that keeps everything flowing. And somewhere in the middle here, we have the limbic system, which is the emotional system where everything is generated. And one of the things that Daniel Goleman talked about is something called emotional hijacking, that when crisis happens or there's an emergency, then we go back to our limbic system and we act on emotions. And so rather than thinking rationally or logically, then our emotional center sometimes will take over or can hijack the way that we interact and behave. And so we have to be aware of how we are. And if we think about the police and the military, they train individuals to think and react under stress and under pressure. Police do something called shock and awe, the same in the military, where there's a lot of noise, banging, disruption, and it's to try and unsettle the mind and incapacitate the person so that they, or people, so they're unable to make rational, logical decisions and react with pace. It puts people into an emotional state of fear or threat. And so shock and awe is one of those particular tactics. But the same thing we can do in the office. We can teach people through scenarios how to get in touch with their emotional center and take control, and so that when things happen where there's outside influences and impacts, that we're then able to ground ourselves and be able to use our brain. Now, it's not to say that people are either rational or emotional, or they're just looking at things from two particular standpoints. That's not correct, because as humans, we are fearfully and wonderfully created, and our brains are all interacted and all interconnected. And so how we operate is based on understanding the aspects of feelings and the way that we think. And so there's three main areas when it comes to the brain, the cognitive side of things, cognition, and then we think about emotions and feelings, and then volition, the desire, the will, what is our purpose. And so these aspects, our aspirations, all of our decisions are made up of a combination of these different areas. We could be focused more on one than the other. Lots of decisions are made within the workplace are very egotistical or self-serving. The same can be the case in our private and personal life. And so we have to sometimes take a step back and say, what am I trying to achieve? Why am I trying to get this outcome? Is this going to just have an advantage for me or for my team, the organization, or my family? And so we have to get in touch. These areas don't work independently. They are all interconnected. The brain is a universe, and within that universe, there are a lot of things happening all at the same time. And so as individuals, we must interact, and we have to get emotionally aware and be also listening. One of the key aspects of those that are have high emotional intelligence is that they are good listeners, that they comprehend very quickly. Yes, most senior executives have an IQ of around 115 plus. And so when we think of IQ is something that after a certain age, it's very hard to develop the IQ to be higher. The same goes with our personality. And so we have to think, and at the beginning I was speaking about us being socially aware. And so we have to get outside of our comfort zone. Don't just keep doing the things that we've always been doing all of our life, either in our personal life or in our professional life. It's time for us to change. And so we have to think of ourselves and where we are in our social aspect. How do we manage ourselves? Do we understand ourselves? Are we aware of what makes us tick? Are we aware of what pushes our buttons and makes us angry or sad? Are we aware of how our behavior impacts society as a whole, whether it's our family, whether it's our friends, whether it's our work colleagues or those employees that are reporting into us? We have to be there, and we have to use empathy. We have to listen. We have to be emotionally astute, and also a provider of thought using both rational logic and reasoning, but also being in touch with our intuition and our emotional side as well, because we are human nature by its very foundation. Of course, there are emotions, and we touched on 6 of those, but those then break into subsections. And so happiness can lead to contentment, or satisfaction can lead to other things. And the same with sadness. Sadness can lead to anxiety or depression. Sadness can lead to inactiveness or apathy. And so we have to see, as leaders, how can we influence others? And we do that through being open. And we do that through giving constructive feedback and trying to coach and guide people. And this doesn't happen overnight. Nothing happens easily. And when we think of trying to develop our emotional intelligence, this is an area that we have to actively work on. Know ourselves, manage ourselves, and then be aware of our social presence. And then how do we develop those relationships? And so last week we talked about strategy and execution, and I went through Governance Guru's 8-point strategy execution model, and we looked at the aspects of setting strategy, the organizational structure, processes and systems, employees, and we spent a long time talking about employees and also the aspects of knowledge and talent and having focused objectives. And there has to be regular monitoring. And this is where the feedback comes in, constructive feedback, where we can bring somebody to the side and speak to them about why performance possibly has decreased. And then where necessary, we change direction or tact, and even we accelerate or we decelerate and we slow down before moving forward. And so I've broken it down into the 8 areas, but the main thing that we need to consider is about employee engagement and making sure that we use emotional intelligence to keep people at their peak performance, being authentic and being genuine with those individuals, sharing our thoughts and feelings in a way that is through empathy. And so when we think of performance, there's performance level, you want the highest performance, but there's also stress. And all of us have been in those situations, in those work situations where our workload is too high, there's under-resourcing, or we've been in times where there isn't enough work to go around and everyone's fighting for the work, everyone's anxious about their jobs. And I'm sure there's been times where all of us throughout our career at some point have been bored. Maybe we're doing something that's very monotonous. And so we have to consider where we are. And when we're emotionally intelligent, we then have an opportunity to have an impact on others, how to calm people down, how to make people feel happier, how to make people feel more secure in their position. And so in the bell curve, as you can see, on the one side, performance is lacking due to either boredom, apathy, or disengagement. And when you've got disengaged employees, it's actually really bad for your organization. And on the flip side, we also have anxiety and fear. If people have too much workload, if they have fear for their job, if they're anxious about the future, maybe a change or transformation is underway, this can have a massive impact on performance. But ultimately, we want to be in this ultimate balance, and there needs to be stress and pressure in people's working life to keep them focused. And the top area is the sweet spot. People feel happy, even though they're under pressure and stress, they are able to perform at the optimal level. They feel happy, they feel secure, and they feel enabled to do what they must do. And so, as I said earlier, IQ, pretty much by the time we're to our early 20s, IQ is already pretty much locked in. The same goes very much so with our personality. But when it comes to emotional intelligence is one of the areas that we can actively develop and grow. And so we have to think about ways that we can do that, and we have to consciously act in a way and start developing habits and traits that when we feel a certain way, we have to consider, why do I feel this way? What has brought up this emotion? How can I channel this emotion for a good purpose rather than acting negatively? Now, during lockdown, it's become more difficult for us to see people's body language, and it's been more challenging in regards to keeping the team engaged. But I put together a few ideas of what I think are good ways to use your emotional intelligence, and also how to manage your team remotely. And some of you may be working with teams in different countries and also in different regions. And so it's very important that we are emotionally connected to those individuals, understanding the pressures that they're going through. And so we have to have regular check-ins with individuals, with heads of department. We should definitely use video conferencing and telephone calls to interact with people, find out their mood, listen to the tone of voice. If it's via video, are they distracted? What's their environment like? How are they operating? Are they their normal self? Are they chatty? Are they a person that's normally chatty and now very, very quiet? Maybe there's some other aspects that are happening. Definitely, we need to have regular team meetings. It's very important when we're managing teams remotely that we have to have regular team meetings and getting people engaged, and also assigning maybe somebody within the team at each meeting to raise a certain point or to discuss or bring insights into a certain area. As leaders, we have to be keeping communication channels open. People will face adversity. People will have loss and bereavement. People will have fears. So we have to be keeping an open channel to allow them to discuss with us, and also encourage team members to do the same. Of course, we want competition, but at the same time, it has to be healthy competition. We want to have collaboration between team members and also teams across the organization. And it's really important to keep us focused. If we think about the bell curve and the optimal position where performance and stress are equally balanced, and we have high performance, we have to keep people focused on goals. And we do that through incremental goals, allowing them to have quick wins that head them towards what their overall objectives are. And finally, definitely spend time praising good work. Let's not just beat people down when they don't meet their targets, but let's praise people, and where it's an individual or it's a team, let's publicize it, make them feel happy, let them know that they're appreciated, and also give people within the team the desire to want to be in that position too, that they get their work praised. If somebody's done above and beyond, there's different things that we can do to try and engage them. And so before we go to the open mic session, I wanted to just give you another quote. Emotional intelligence includes the ability to engage in sophisticated information processing about one's own and others' emotions, and the ability to use this information as a guide to thinking and behavior. That is, individuals high in emotional intelligence pay attention to use, understand, and manage emotions. And these skills serve adaptive functions that potentially benefit others, themselves, and others. And so we have the opportunity through emotional intelligence, by being able to read others and read ourselves, to have an influence over others. But if we don't pay attention, then we won't be able to use, understand, and manage either our own emotions or help people understand their own. And so with that, I would like to open up the floor. I've got one question that's come in. What do you think are the key characteristics of a great leader? Well, we could spend a whole day just talking about different types of leadership styles and leadership qualities. But one of the important things within a leader is that they have to be inspiring. They have to lead. People should be inspired and motivated to follow that particular individual. And the characteristics, if you don't trust the person that's leading you, then you will only follow them because of fear. And it's better to build trust. So if we build up trust and that emotional angle, if we're open and people understand and trust us and they believe in us and they believe in what we say, and when we are directing people and guiding people or giving an instruction, people will trust that the reason that we're doing it is for the greater good of the organization and not for a selfish reason for ourselves. Does that answer that particular question? Did we have any other questions before we bring the session to a close? Emotional intelligence is something. Yes. Is there a question? And so from that respect, we have the opportunity to have a massive impact on our own life, on our family's life, and also in our working life through developing our emotional intelligence. And it's very important that we take the time to understand ourselves and understand what makes us feel a certain way. And then by doing that, we're better able to understand and give guidance and help people with their own emotions and being mindful. Mindfulness is another great characteristic of a great leader. And in today's society, we see more of the affiliative type leader or coaching leaders or even servant leaders who are focused on the greater good of the organization, who are happy to get involved, to put their shoulder to the wheel. And so in this respect, we have to try and gain the trust and respect, because trust and respect are not something that happen just because of a title. If I'm the CEO or the chairman of an organization, this doesn't mean that people necessarily will respect me. It may mean that they respect the position, but not necessarily me as an individual. A question has come in talking about the aspects of including emotional intelligence topics in board development plans. Well, definitely, if we think of the board themselves meet irregularly. So even active boards may only meet up to 10 or 12 times during the course of any particular given year. And so emotional intelligence is definitely something that the board should be focused on. It's very important for the board to consider their own drivers as well, because they are leading others, and through emotional intelligence they get a feeling and they can read body language. So having the board understand about what's said, and also being able to read between the lines and not just what's said, but also how is it said and what is not said. Sometimes we learn more or we understand more through what is not said than what is actually said, and it's how it's delivered. Quite often, if we have people that talk a lot very quickly, then there may be an issue where they are trying to cover up or mask the fact that they don't know a particular area and they don't want to be asked any particular questions in detail. So a question, a very good question. Why is there always a huge gap between reality and theory? And so in this respect, there doesn't need to necessarily be a huge gap. Not many people think about the aspects of emotional intelligence. And so I'm a governance and structuring expert. I also focus on human resources and training. But we have to look at things holistically. And within organizations, we have to get the best from the people that we have working with us and for us, our employees, our peers, our line managers, our heads of department. And so it's not just getting the aspects of theory and reality. The reality is that very few businesses are focused on the emotional intelligence side of things. It's still, many organizations are still following old ways of thought. Another question came up saying, what is the balance between fear and vulnerability? Well, on the one hand, culturally, we have to be aware of how things are within an organization, and also the context of that organization within the country culture. And certain cultures, certain behaviors are seen as the norm. And in other countries, there is a focus on empathy and doing things in a certain particular way. So when we think about fear and vulnerability, of course, our emotional state, if we feel under attack or we feel fearful, then of course we are going to be defensive, fight or flight. We are going to be in a situation where we maybe are too fearful and then hesitant to move forward. So we're scared to drive, so we don't use public transport. We only walk everywhere. And then we become so fearful that we're also now scared of walking because we're afraid of being having a collision or an impact with the vehicle and us. So we stay at home. We don't go out of our house. And so our fear blocks us and being able to develop. So then we then stay at home, and then we become more and more and more fearful, and fear grows. If we don't manage our fears, fears grow. But at the same time, we have to be vulnerable, because part of the aspects of building trust and developing trust is being allowing yourself to be slightly vulnerable, not naive, but vulnerable, allowing people to get to trust us and understand us, and also giving trust. So from that respect, when we're giving trust to someone, to that in that specific aspect, we're being vulnerable, because we're opening up ourselves and allowing an individual to potentially either have and develop the trust, or to break our trust and develop that and use it in a negative way. And so I hope that answers all of the questions that have come in. Thank you very much, one and all. And we have our last session next week on building an optimal enterprise risk management culture. And so we'll be looking at that. I've saved this to the last. I find the emotional intelligence and enterprise risk management and culture and building culture are very important. When people understand themselves and how they operate, it also has an impact on organizations. So thank you very much. Thank you for all your questions. It's been a pleasure. Remember to be open. Don't close yourself off and wear sunglasses or be closed from people, because if emotionally, if you're trying to connect with me and I'm closed as an individual, you may find it very difficult to read me as an individual. But if we are open, you can see my eyes, you can see my facial features, I'm open, and you'll know whether or not I really do have empathy and whether I am emotionally intelligent. Take care, everyone. Stay safe and see you soon.